Oh, hello. I'm pleased to meet you all virtually, and I hope that I'll meet you in person one day soon. My name is Derek Munn, and I'm the Director of Policy and Public Affairs at the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists. I've attended student days for a number of years, and I know that many of you will be final year, many of you will be particularly focused on job hunting, knowing what you need to do about new graduate competencies, and how all this is going to work in a time of COVID-19 and the pandemic. And a lot of you will therefore be going, oh, I'm not sure I've got time for politics. I'm not sure that's my thing. I'm trained to be a speech and language therapist. Does that relate to me? Some of you I know will have an interest in the political work. And I hope that what I'm going to say will explain to both of you, first of all, what the Royal College does on your behalf, but secondly, why it's useful to you to have some interest and awareness of the politics and policy that surrounds speech and language therapy. And actually, at the very end, I'll say, this is how it can help you get a job. So what you can see here on this first slide, normally if I was in the room with you, I'd ask you to name these buildings. These are the 4 parliaments of the countries of the United Kingdom. So some of you will know the top left one, House of Commons, technically called the Palace of Westminster, that's its Sunday name. On the bottom left, some of you will recognise Stormont, which is the home of the Northern Ireland Assembly outside Belfast. In the top right, you've got Senedd Cymraeg, the Welsh Senate in Cardiff. And the bottom right picture is the Scottish Parliament, where I used to work in one of the windows up at the top there. So this is to emphasise that everything we do in politics, public affairs, and externally relates to all 4 nations of the UK, and we have to do it 4 times over, and we do. So now, as we move on through the slides, I'm very quickly going to show you a snapshot of today. So I'm recording this in late November 2020. This is just a snapshot of where policy and public affairs happens to be today. Some of the stuff we've done recently, but I'm going to try and use that to illustrate some of the key messages and areas relating to policy, public affairs, and speech and language therapy. So we're kicking off with Northern Ireland, and you can see here that the first thing I brought up is about rehabilitation for patients following COVID-19. And this is to show you that one of the things we have to do is respond very, very quickly to stuff that is going on right now. And for all of you, as you approach the end of your courses and prepare to move into the world of work, the context is COVID-19 and the pandemic. Now, there are other areas too, telehealth and remote working. Some of you will have experienced what it means for placements, whole heap of impacts, but this one's about rehab. And then you'll see in the next one, an example of how our work can expand the profession into new areas. So criminal justice is an example of an area where there is so much scope for speech and language therapy. We can make such a difference, but actually at the moment it's a relatively small specialism, and certainly in Northern Ireland, where this paper comes from, that we had to influence this to say, this is why you need to be aware of speech, language and communication needs when you're working with offenders and young offenders. And through that, we build the case. We now have the first specific dedicated posts in Northern Ireland around justice. Moving on. This gives you the first bit of context about, for those of you who are going, how does this relate to me getting a job? Well, part of our lobbying and influencing explicitly relates to the workforce. And by the workforce, we mean making the case to say, you've got to have the right number of speech and language therapists to deal with the demand, but you've also got to have the right level of specialism and seniority. And that'll be important for you going forward as you start to think about your career path and the way you're going to move up through the profession over time. So those are my Northern Ireland examples. I'm going to use the Welsh examples to talk to you about the different strands of politics and public affairs. There are broadly 3. Now, normal people, people who are not political, normal voters, kind of get these merged and mixed up, and that's perfectly fine and understandable. but actually for our work, we have to keep a distinction. So the first area is the government. Well, in fact, there are 4 governments in the UK. So you'll see here this document, which is the future of stroke care in Wales. And actually, if you were going to work in stroke, you would need to be aware of the policy context in whichever country you're in. This is Wales. This is the government stroke delivery plan. And we had to work very hard, and the other nations too, to make sure that speech and language therapy is properly recognised in this government delivery plan. So that's the first area, which is government. The second area is around parliaments. So you have the government, but then you have the parliaments, and that includes not only the government ministers, but also the government backbenchers and the opposition politicians too. So it's a wider group of politicians than just the government. And here's an example from what's called a cross-party group in the Welsh Senedd, doing a report into neurological conditions. And we were able then to influence through the members of the Welsh Senedd and say, the Welsh government's doing okay on acquired neuro, but actually there are areas where we think you could and should go further. And so you're able to bring that influence to bear. So we've got the government, we've got the parliament. The third area relates to political parties. Yeah. So in Scotland and Wales in 2021, there will be elections, national elections for the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Senedd. In 2022, there will be elections to the Northern Ireland Assembly. The next UK elections aren't scheduled until 2024, as we know, but it's been an uncertain time in politics, so you can never tell. So here is a bit of our manifesto for the Welsh, it says Assembly there, that'll be updated now to say Senedd, elections for next year. And political parties put forward to voters what they'll do if they're elected. If they win and become the government, their programme for government is based on that political party manifesto. So we influence the government, we influence the parliament, and we influence the political parties. And that triangle is what public affairs work is about. Let's move on to Scotland. This brings in the next strand, which is that everything we do needs to be as much as possible co-produced with service users. So the ambition of RCSLT policy and public affairs, like other bits of the organisation, is that wherever possible, this is jointly done with experts by experience, with people who themselves have lived experience of speech, language, communication, and swallowing needs. So this example here, which is about a law in Scotland, which is a good law. It's a law that says people who are assessed as being able to benefit from AAC have the legal right to get that AAC. Getting that delivered on the ground is challenging. And it's challenging for speech therapists too, because budgets are limited. The work we do around AAC is entirely co-produced with people who themselves are AAC users. And that service user co-production perspective is the next thing to know about policy and public affairs work. This is another example of workforce, but here what you can see is that we are working with other allied health professionals, the physios, the OTs, the dietitians, the people that we have to work with on a daily basis in multidisciplinary teams. We also work with them on our influencing. And the last Scotland example is around looking at a government programme for the year and seeing what's coming forward. So for example, when we looked at the Scottish government's programme, we could see that they're going to bring forward a bill to put the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child into Scottish law. Now that's really powerful for children who are users of speech and language therapy. So we're going to engage with that piece of legislation as it goes through. Okay, finally, let's look at the UK. And obviously the nature of devolution means that there is no English Parliament, and likewise, there is no English Public Affairs team. It's a UK team, but because of devolution, a lot of what we're dealing with at UK level is specific to England. Actually, justice is England and Wales. So these things are always more subtle. And this again is an example of a parliamentary committee, and one that we've recently been able to get to recognise explicitly in the Justice Committee report the need for speech and language therapy and communication support, and actually some references to swallowing too in their report on the youth justice system. The next one is an example again about building the case externally. So I talked about justice earlier on. The example here is mental health, where we have to put together the evidence base, create a narrative, win the argument, which we're now starting to do, that mental health services need to take account of speech, language, communication and swallowing, and therefore need access to specialist speech and language therapy as part of those services. And the last UK example is about partnership. So sometimes when people ask me what I do, I say it's all the P's: politics, policy and partnership. And the Community Rehabilitation Alliance is an example of a number of professional bodies, ourselves, the physios and others, working alongside a number of service user organisations, the Stroke Association, the MND Association and others, to collectively make the case, in this case around community rehabilitation, and saying, of course we need to get right what happens when people have a stroke or have acquired neuro or have a progressive condition like MND. We also need to get the community rehab aspect of this right as well. And particularly post-COVID-19, when there's rightly been all of this focus on acute and intensive care settings, what's going to be the community follow through? So that would be that example there. So that's a quick spin around using just a snapshot of some policy and public affairs going on right now to illustrate the different strands of what we do. The last area I'm going to cover, you'll often have seen Giving Voice. Giving Voice is what we call a brand. So it's a logo. You've got the official Royal College logo, which is the crest, which is very formal and is used to badge things formally. The Giving Voice logo is more informal, and it's one that members can use to badge awareness raising activity, campaigning activity, and then we have the Twitter feed, and we have that as a badge that you can make use of. So those of you who are interested in campaigning, now campaigning can mean trying to get a law changed or trying to get a cut stopped. Campaigning can also just mean trying to make people where I am more aware of speech and language therapy and what we do. And we can see on the next slide some recent examples of making that happen. And we know that students and student societies are often the most creative and energetic and impactful. And in the top left there, you can see the SLT Society at Essex doing a signing and lip syncing to George Ezra, just as a way of building awareness of those communication supports. And in the bottom right, you can see the Newcastle University Student Society doing a gig with Lost Voice Guy to make that external impact and push around speech and language therapy. And I have to say, Newcastle have won the national prize several years for the work that they've done. But you can see that all four of these are badged with Giving Voice. Yeah, we use that as the logo and the brand, and you can do that too, both in your final months as students, but also when you get out there into your newly qualified roles. So, I mentioned at the start that I know that many of you will be going, that's all very well, Derek, but how does this help me get a job? Well, here's an example of a job specification for someone to be a Band 5 speech and language therapist. And we know that every job you go for, loads of people are going to apply. But look what's here in the list of things that they're looking for. Knowledge of national policies and procedures relevant to the client group, and awareness of the current political changes and pressures affecting the NHS. So I know that some of you, I hope some of you, are inspired by this and want to engage with the Royal College's work in policy and public affairs. But if nothing else, as you're preparing those job applications and going to those job interviews, showing you that you've got that bigger picture around policy and politics as it affects the area you're going to be working in, is something that's going to mark you out, make your application and your interview better. Thank you very much for listening. There's the contact details for those of you who want to get involved. Well, obviously, you're watching this remotely, you can do this in your own time. So you can see there the different Twitter handles. If you've been inspired and would like to become part of the work that we do in policy and public affairs, please do tweet us or DM us. We'll get back to you and we'll hook you into the relevant networks. I hope you found that useful and interesting. And I'd like to say thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoy Student Day. Good luck with your final placements and exams. And I look forward to meeting you as full registered members of the Royal College in due course. Bye for now.